This video is here to help you complete the form on finding the zeros and factoring quadratics. So for question number 1 and question number 2 here, the directions say to find the zeros of the function. So first of all, whenever the question asks you to find the zeros, that is the same exact thing as finding the x-intercepts. Okay, so zeros mean find the x-intercepts. That they could also refer to them as roots or solutions. Zeros, x-intercepts, roots, and solutions, they all mean the same thing. So when we're asked to find the zeros of a function, what we have to do is we have to take our function. When we look at it, we see that it's already in factored form because it has two parentheses being multiplied together. So since it's already factored, all we have to do is make the equation equal to 0. And then we're going to solve it. The way that we solve it is we take each parentheses and solve them separately. So hopefully you remember doing this in class. I always drew it with a little arrow. So x plus 5, we're going to set just that piece equal to 0. And we are going to solve to get x by itself. So the opposite of adding 5 would be subtracting 5. Whatever I do to one side of the equal sign, I do to the other side. So I'm going to minus 5 over there. My 5s are going to cancel. And then x is going to come down. And then I'm just going to keep my x equal sign in the middle. And then over here, I'm going to do this math. 0 minus 5 is negative 5. So that's one answer. And then I have to do the same thing with my other parentheses to get my second answer. So I'm going to take my x minus 1 and I'm going to make that equal to 0. Now I'm going to solve for x. So the opposite of a negative 1 is adding 1. So whatever I do to one side, I'm going to do to the other. So my negative 1 and my positive 1 cancel. So x equals 0 plus 1 is 1. So the zeros and the solutions are x equals negative 5 and x equals 1. For number 2, the question asks you to find the zeros again, but this time they don't give you the function. They don't give you the equation. They actually give you the graph. So it's easier when you have the graph. The zeros are the x-intercepts. So you just want to look at the graph and look at the x-axis, which is this horizontal axis that goes here, and find where the parabola crosses the x-axis. And so as you can see, it's right here at that point, 2, 0. So that's one of our roots. That's one of our solutions. 6, 0, that's one of our roots. That's one of our solutions. So the answers are x equals 2 and x equals 6. This is not a part of this lesson here, but I just want to refresh your memory on this point down here, the very bottom point of our parabola, 4, negative 4. That's called the vertex point. So I just wanted to refresh your memory on that. Hopefully you do remember that. Okay, so now that we talked about zeros, let's talk about factoring. So it's been a while since we've done factoring, but whenever you factor a quadratic, the visual way that I taught you to do that was called the big X. So hopefully you guys all remember the big X. If you don't, we're going to review it right now. So the very first thing that we have to do before anything is we have to identify what numbers are A, B, and C, right? So remember, A, B, and C are only numbers, and you have to be careful with the signs. So when we look at our function here, A is 3 because it's with the x squared. B is negative 20 because it's with the single x in the middle. And C is negative 7 because it's the constant whole number at the end. Okay, so now that we've identified A, B, and C, I just want to make sure that you guys remember, I'm going to list them over to the side here. A is 3, B is negative 20, and C is negative 7. They are numbers only. You should not be using the letter X at all. All right, so now it's time to set up our big X. Do you remember what goes at the top of the big X? It's A times C. So A is 3, C is negative 7. So 3 times negative 7 is negative 21. That's going to go at the top. And then whatever B is goes at the bottom. So negative 20 is B, so that's going to go at the bottom. So now that we set that up, it's time to make our T-chart to list factors. So the number that you always list the factors for is the top number. So 21. You can ignore the signs for now. We'll figure out the signs later, but we're just going to list all the factors of 21. So let's start with 1 and 21. 2 and anything? No. 3 and anything. Yeah, 3 and 7. 4 does not work. Can't divide 21 by 4. 5 doesn't work and 6 doesn't work, so which brings us back to 7. So we are done. Those are all the factors of 21. So from our list here, we have to choose which pair can somehow give me the bottom number, 20, by adding or subtracting. So the pair that can give me 20 is 1 and 21. Okay, so now that I know I'm using 1 and 21, it's time to figure out the signs. When the top number here is negative and the bottom number is negative, that means only one of these numbers can be negative. So which number has to be negative to get me to negative 20 when I add them? It would be negative 21 and then plus 1. So negative 21 and then plus 1. So now that we have our signs figured out, we are ready to start wrapping it up. So do you remember what we have to divide both sides by? We have to divide both sides by AX. In this problem, we have an A, which is 3. So we're going to divide both sides by 3x. And then we're going to see if we can simplify any of these fractions. So 1/3, we can't simplify that. But negative 21 over 3. Negative 21 over 3, we can simplify. That becomes negative 7. So we can simplify that to negative 7 and then just keep the x down there in the denominator. Okay, so right now we're pretty much done. We just have to write out our final answer because we can't leave our answer like this. So the way that we write it is our first factor is going to be one of our fractions over here. You always start with the denominator first. So x, and then the numerator is negative 7, and you write that in parentheses. So x minus 7. And then on the other side, that's going to be our other answer. You start with the denominator first, 3x, and then the numerator is plus 1. And you put that in parentheses, and we are finished. We have completely factored the quadratic. Okay, so let's go ahead and do number 4. This one asks us to factor the quadratic and find the zero. So we're going to do the exact same thing that we did in number 3, and then we're going to take it a second step further and actually solve it. Okay, so first thing, let's identify A, B, and C. So in this function, A is not there, which means it's an invisible 1. Do you remember that? B is 7 and C is 12. So in this one, it's pretty easy because A is 1 and then everything is positive. So this is a pretty easy problem. So at the top is going to be A times C. 1 times 12 is 12. At the bottom is B, which is 7. We're going to list our t-chart for the top number, which is 12. So factors of 12, 1 and 12. 2 and 6, 3 and 4, and that's it. So out of our pairs of factors, which pair can somehow give me 7 when I add or subtract? That would be 3 and 4. Everything's positive, so I don't have to worry about changing any signs. 3 times 4 is 12, and 3 plus 4 is 7. So that's my pair of factors that I want to use. I'm ready to divide both sides by AX. In this case, A is 1, so it's just invisible. We don't even have to write it. When A is 1, it's easy. You don't have to simplify any fractions, so we're ready to write out our final answer. On the left-hand side, over here, our factor is X, and that's a positive 3, so you connect it with a plus sign. And then our other factor over here, denominator first, X plus 4. And we have factored our quadratic. So now the directions say to factor it, but then it also says to find the zeros, which means solve it. So now we are going to take this an extra step, and now we're going to do exactly what we did in question number 1. We are going to take our entire factored function and we're going to make it equal to 0. And now we can solve each piece separately. So x plus 3 equals 0. We're going to subtract 3 from both sides, and x equals negative 3. And then x plus 4, we're going to make that equal to 0, subtract 4 from both sides. So x equals negative 4. So our final solutions are x equals negative 3 and x equals negative 4. Okay, so I have two more that I want to show you, and it's just because they're a little bit harder. So when we look at question number 5, we are going to factor here. As soon as you look at this problem, this was something that I pointed out to you in class all the time. These numbers are pretty large. So when you have to factor a quadratic and the numbers are pretty large, I always asked you to look at them and see if you can divide all of them by a specific number first to then make them all smaller so that they're easier to work with. So when we look at this function, we have 2x squared minus 22x plus 48. So all of these numbers can be divided by 2. So I'm going to divide this entire function by 2 right off the bat to make them all smaller. So 2 divided by 2 is 1. Negative 22 divided by 2 is negative 11. And 48 divided by 2 is 24. So my new function is x squared minus 11x plus 24. So this is the one that now I can use to set up my big X. So at the top, a times c, 1 times 24 is 24, and b is at the bottom, which is negative 11. So factors of 24 is what we're listing in our t-chart. So 1 and 24, 2 and 12, 3 and anything? Yeah, 3 and 8, 4 and anything? Yeah, 4 and 6, and 5 doesn't work. So those are all of our factors. So out of our list of factors, which pair can somehow add or subtract to 11? That would be 3 and 8, right? So now when the top number is positive and the bottom number is negative, that means they both have to be negative. So negative 8 and negative 3, because a negative times a negative gives you positive 24, and negative 3 minus 8 gives you negative 11. So everything is all correct with our signs, and we're good to go. So let's finish up the problem. We are going to divide both sides by ax, but we made a1, so it's nice and easy. And now we're ready to write our factors. X minus 3 is one factor, and then on the other side, x minus 8 is the other factor. Now there's one more thing that you can't forget before you represent your final answer. Do you remember what that is? It's the 2 that we divided by at the very beginning. You have to make sure that you bring that down and include that in your final answer. It doesn't go away. You already factored it out technically, so it still counts as a part of your final answer. So just make sure you bring it down and include it. And now we're done. Okay, last one. This one is special when you look at it. We're factoring completely. When you look at it, a lot of you guys in class would normally tell me that there's no C. What do you notice about this one that's different? There's no C. Well, the reason why there's no C is because the last term has an X in it. The middle term is x squared, and the first term is x cubed. So this is a cubic. This is not a quadratic. So we have to, in order to factor, we need to see if we can divide out or factor out the variable. So we have 3x's here, 2x's here, and 1x here. So that means the same way I divided everything by 2 in number 5, I can divide all of these by x in number 6. So when I divide an x out, that means I'm taking 1 away. I'm taking one x away from every single term. So instead of x cubed, it's going to be x squared. Instead of x squared, it's going to be an x. And instead of a single x, it's going to be gone, and it's just going to be our constant whole number. So this is going to become x squared minus 7x minus 8. So now it's a regular quadratic, and we're ready to set up our big X. So what's going to go up the top is negative 8 times 1, which is negative 8, and then b at the bottom, negative 7. So we're going to list factors of 8. 1 times 8, 2 times 4. That's it. So which pair can somehow give me 7 by adding or subtracting? So that would be 1 and 8, right? Since 8 is negative, only one of these numbers is allowed to be negative, and it has to get you to negative 7. So that means I would do negative 8 and I would add 1. Negative 8 and adding 1 brings you to negative 7. Negative 8 times positive 1 is negative 8. So we are all good, and our signs are correct, and we're ready to divide by ax. We made a just 1x. So it's easy again. We're going to list our factors. Left-hand side is x minus 8, and the right-hand side is x plus 1. One more thing that you can't forget, just like we did in number 5, that 2 that we divided by came down. So this x that we divided by and factored out initially comes down. So it's a part of our final answer and we're done. Okay, so hopefully this video helps you to complete the rest of this form.